Welcome back, parents. Again, I'm so excited to have you here with me. You know, we've been discussing from day one that parenting is really one of the most intense schools of life. We've enrolled ourselves into this lifelong journey without realizing what it really requires of us. We now begin to see that it's not really about raising our children or fixing, controlling, or curating them. Now we're beginning to understand more acutely that this journey is all about you, the parent. In fact, every single reaction you're coming to realize that you previously thought was being caused by the other, by your bad child, now you're beginning to see, oh, maybe this is an invitation for me to become more aware of who it is I am. You're beginning to see that all that you thought was being created by the other or by life is now actually being co-created by you. Now you begin to realize that every time you feel upset about how maybe your child is late or not doing their things on time or like you want them to, now you're beginning to realize that there's a piece in there that is about you perhaps disliking the fact that you also struggle with showing up on time perhaps. Or maybe where before you used to get bothered if your child kept a messy room and used to get angry with them, now you're beginning to question, what about a messy room is so bothering me? Why am I so affected when my child doesn't keep their room clean? Now you're beginning to ask questions about yourself. You're beginning to realize that this is a co-creation. It's not just your child who's the one at fault all the time. You're beginning to realize that a lot of your non-acceptance of your children is really a mirror of your own non-acceptance of your own self, your own ideations, your own belief systems, and your own life. So I cannot emphasize enough, your self-awareness is the only path toward a greater consciousness. And more importantly, your self-acceptance is the only path to accepting your children. It's only when we accept ourselves that we can unconditionally love and connect with our children. Our own acceptance of our own lives as is will be the very conduit that allows us to accept our children's life as is. You know, all our issues around connecting with our children really boil down to our own capacity to connect with our own essence. You know, if we haven't accepted ourselves, chances are we're not going to accept with our children. In fact, in my own life, I used to do this test, you know. When I used to walk into the room, I used to notice how judgmental or non-accepting am I being of my child. And I used to use that as a test to check in with myself, to ask myself, how judgmental and non-accepting am I of myself? I used to notice during the day, oh, I'm really unhappy with myself right now. And I used to almost predict that the greater the degree of my own unhappiness with myself, guaranteed I was going to go home and blow up at my child. I began paying attention to my own unhappiness, and I began using this as a litmus test, guaranteeing, almost predicting that the more unhappy I was with myself, I'm going to be unhappy with my children. I began to see the interconnectedness between my own level of self-acceptance and my ability to unconditionally accept my child. You know, our lack of acceptance of ourselves shows up in all sorts of ways with our children, especially between mothers and daughters and fathers and sons. You know, we in particular expect more out of children who are of the same gender. I still remember this one client who truly struggled accepting her daughter's body. She had a struggle accepting that her daughter did not possess this ideal body type that she herself did, and she expected all around her to do as well. You know, she had this image of this prototype of this ideal, conventional standard of this body type, this beauty, and her daughter simply did not fall into it. So you can well imagine when we mothers see our daughters through the eyes of non-acceptance, how that must feel for our daughters. You know, we put on our daughters this ideal notion of beauty or worth, and when our children, our daughters, don't fit into that prototype, then we, in a very subtle way but obvious way, we disregard them. We treat them as unworthy. And our children, they absorb this sense of unworthiness and they begin to walk around with a sense of shame. So this mother one day was reporting how her daughter particularly got upset with her and stormed out of the house in anger. So I explored with this mother, you know, what happened? So this mother quite shyly explained what happened. She said, you know, I think my daughter is a little bit on the heavy side, so I did not butter her toast to all the four corners. And my daughter got so upset with me because my daughter knew I was judging her in that moment that she just reacted and stormed out of the house. I cannot tell you countless moments in my own parenting and in the parenting of my clients where, because the parent themselves doesn't accept their own body type or beauty or worth or sense of imperfection, that they project this onto their children and begin to not accept the child. And the child picks up on this so clearly and then begins to walk around with anger or a sense of shame. You know, most of us have been raised on this diet of not good enoughness. This is a fact. And unless we become aware of how much of our behaviors, you know, the way we put on all our makeup in the morning, the way we get ready, the way we overwork or underwork, the way we exercise, every aspect of our behavior, if we're not aware how it is undergirded by a sense of not good enoughness, then we will pass this on to our children quickly and seamlessly. Guess what? We are now at our halfway point of the quest. I am sure this has not been an easy journey. To look in the mirror with a sense of honesty and transparency and authenticity is not something that perhaps you were prepared to do. But let me again applaud you for your humility, for your vulnerability, for your honesty, and for your courage. It takes all of this in order to elevate ourselves into a higher state of consciousness. I know being vulnerable and admitting to our failings as a parent brings about this deep sense of regret and sometimes guilt and shame. I know I have experienced guilt and shame on almost a daily basis myself. But here's what I want to offer you about guilt and shame. The way that I resolve my own guilty and shameful feelings is by having a deep sense of acceptance that, you know, I could only do what I knew how to do. And when we know better, we do better. And each one of us, you and I, acted in the level of consciousness that was available to us. We could not act differently because we did not know differently, including me. You know, I didn't know how to be a conscious parent for the first few years of my child's life. I too parented traditionally. And when I had the epiphanies of consciousness, I looked back with such a deep sense of remorse and regret. This is natural. You know, we all want to be the best we can be, but clinging to guilt and shame actually creates further disconnection. So I'm going to encourage you to release your guilt and shame as we move forward toward a greater self-acceptance. So today I have two mini tasks for you. The first task is to reflect, again in your journal, the many ways you have yet to still accept your child. What are the ways that you still don't fully accept your child? Perhaps, you know, you don't accept that your child is a little messy, or you don't accept that your child is a little tardy, or your child procrastinates. Whatever it is that you have a hard time accepting about your child, write that down. And the second task I have for you today is write down the ways you don't accept yourself. What are the parts in you that you don't accept? Maybe it's to do with your age. Maybe it's to do with your sense of purpose or mission. Maybe it's to do with your idea around beauty. Write that down. It's important to look at the ways you don't accept yourself, because inevitably those ways will reflect onto your children. And then I want you to look at what you've written and enter your heart with a sense of compassion. Can you have compassion toward yourself? Because when you have self-compassion, you will automatically have compassion toward your children. You know, being in the middle of the quest is going to bring up quite a lot of internal chatter. I want you to become aware of this self-talk. Is your self-talk encouraging? Is it based on a growth mindset? Is it challenging you and encouraging you? Or is your internal chatter negative? Is it putting you down? Is it telling you you're not good enough, that you should be at a different place? Notice this internal criticism. Notice this toxic, negative self-talk. I have it, you have it, we all have it. And only when we become aware of this self-talk and put it in check and transform it to a growth-based self-talk can we move on this path of consciousness. So be aware of that internal critic and tone it down. So don't forget, do your reflection seriously and honestly. Think about how you can better accept yourself and share your insights with the tribe. I cannot wait to see you here again tomorrow.